grew up in a culture which is very prudish, very uncomfortable with sexuality. There's a narrative about sexuality that we grew up with. So there is a culture of shame uh, that we live in. That's the water that we swim in. This infuses our cinema. So we rarely see women as sexual beings having desire. And often what happens, at least in the 90s, I think this is really changing. But in the 90s, when I was growing up, uh, often the love interest, the female love interest would be introduced, and sometimes she'd be wearing a mini skirt and she'd be dressed very sexy and she'd be very cool. But by the time she became marriageable, she would be much more traditionally dressed. She would become much more modest. She would become much more chaste. And in a way, women had to let go of their sexuality to become acceptable. And so this is not explicitly stated, but this is implicit in so much of the cinema. And this is something that I really challenge in my work. The other thing, which is really directly related, both of these are directly related to my film Girls Will Be Girls, that the character of the mothers that we often saw were very self-sacrificing. They were martyrs. They were so happy to give everything up for their children and their husbands, and that is what brought them joy. And I felt like it just didn't allow mothers to be full beings. And honestly, like the women in my life, the young women, the mothers, the grandmothers, were so much more interesting and rounded and contradictory than the mothers and the female characters I saw on screen. So I really take inspiration from the women in my life. Uh, and I think just doing that ends up challenging the narratives I grew up with. I think relationships are so complicated. A mother-daughter relationship is so complicated, especially in our world where if things are going the right way, which we're seeing right now is not always the case, but if things are going the right way, each generation of women carves out a little bit more freedom for themselves, a little bit more agency. And in this setting, how is it not how can the mother's generation not feel any sadness or envy or resentment while they also are happy for their daughters and want them to have these freedoms, want to enable these freedoms? But there is this complicated feeling. And our world also prizes women for their youth and their beauty as they grow older. You start very quickly to lose social cachet. All relationships, I think, are complicated. Very close relationships of love, I think, have a little bit of hate. You can only hate your most loved ones in a way, because they can push your buttons, in a special kind of way. But in addition to that, because of our societal structures, the mother-daughter relationship to me is so, so deeply complicated. So in writing, for me, it was always important that I don't simplify the character's intention. So this mother loves her daughter, will fight for her like a lioness and protect her, wants to give her the freedoms that she didn't have. At the same time, is envious of her, is resentful of her, and enjoys some attention from this her daughter's boyfriend and feels some thrill because she's not really seen as a woman or even like a full person by other people in her life. And I really tried to write and direct in a way that all of these things were present and alive. I think when films come from other parts of the world, especially poorer parts of the world, there is a kind of emphasis on the issue, the message behind the film. And I think film is the wrong medium for that. I think one should write an essay about this. A film is good for experiencing something. And not to say that there shouldn't be underlying political themes or messages. I consider my work very political, deeply political, and tackling important themes around feminism and sexism and patriarchy and all of these things. But I don't have a thesis statement that I'm trying to prove, and every character is trying to prove or disprove my little argument, because then I don't allow people to be full and contradictory. And I think this is why when films come from India, or people will say, is this about women's issues? Is this about how, you made this film because it's really hard for women? And yes and no. I mean, we don't ask these questions about, like, to white filmmakers. They can just make a film about some particular character. We don't assume that they're trying to say something about all Americans. And I think this is a burden that I would like to remove from our films, because then our characters and our stories can breathe